Hello and welcome to the Better Leaders Show. Today I'm talking to Sofia Mourato. Welcome, Sofia.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And I invited you, first of all, because you have this beautiful title now with your business, The Communication Ecologist. And I think that what I want to talk a bit more about today is about communication in teams and leadership in communication and so on. But first, let's see who you are a bit, because you have like a very diverse background. You have a lot of experience, different experiences, different teaching, and you say you are a Portuguese creative based in Amsterdam who has many hats: visual artist, designer, culture creator, communication manager. So there's a lot that you've done. If you look at all those jobs and forget about the one that you do now, what is the one that you have the best memories of?
The ones that I have the best relationships with my colleagues.
And which one is that?
When I was a film festival director, and my team was very small, but and was changing every year because the funds were not so high. So every year I would have to have a new team, and people that would come to me were all very passionate about film and architecture. So we were all having so much fun watching movies and talking about it and trying to figure out how that would create a discussion in the public realm, and then figuring out which people to invite. I mean, everything, the whole relationship was based on this love for sharing and love for creating something together. So that's my best memory.
A film festival, it sounds like a huge thing. Is it? It was a yearly thing. It was specific for architecture. It's the same what I think of, like a huge size where they have all these films playing at the same time and a lot of guests and having red carpet shows and stuff like that?
Well, it was, let's say, a more low-key film festival. It was a small film festival, but encompassing everything that you just said. Not a red carpet, except that it was more down to earth and more community based. But it was indeed showcasing films about the built environment. So about the lives in cities, lives in buildings, specific buildings or a house, or biographies of architects and designers. Yeah, so that's what I did for almost 10 years.
And I know you have, from what you've studied, you have a creative background. So you work with film and communication. But why this architecture part? What is that important?
For me, when I was a visual artist, I finished the Rietveld Academy in Amsterdam, and then I moved to Chile. And in Chile, I got really interested about architecture. I got to know the beautiful architecture of Chile, of Chilean architects, and then I discovered that architecture had a lot of things in common with cinema, which was my first passion. And that's about the editing of the space and also the communication with people. Architecture doesn't live without people, and cinema also doesn't exist if there's no spectators looking at it. So it's all related for me, my journey, the way I think about communication and relating to others, and the way I can scrap uh, many different ideas from different mediums. So that's what I do. I do like to connect ideas and, in the end, connecting people.
Hmm.
I don't know if that was maybe a vague answer to your question, but that's mostly how architecture entered my life. It was by chance or not. I'm interested in many things, and that's one thing that I explored for the last years. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I will show in a bit. I will show the LinkedIn, your LinkedIn profile, and people when they are on LinkedIn now, they can see it obviously. So then you can see all the experiences that she has, and also the love of architecture and the creative part that she's doing. If you talked about the communication of movies with the audience, and the communication of the architect through the buildings with the audience or the citizens. Why is communication so important to you in that aspect?
You know, one of my favorite places to be is inside of a screening room. So some people go outside to the nature, some people go to sauna, some people run to relax and to be with myself and to yeah to rest. I just go to a film room. And why is it important and why is it this connection with communication? Because I think that every time that I go to watch a movie, it's empathy practice for me. It's an empathy exercise. You know, do you ever notice that we always choose a character that it's kind of we have empathy for, or we're like, I see myself into this character, and then you go through the movie being a bit on his shoes, on her shoes, and that's empathy for me. And that's a very strong way of communicating. And everyone will choose their own character to be empathic with. So again, it's how I connect cinema with communication.
And watching movies means for you also going to the cinema, so not watching it at television at home.
Going to the cinema, yes. Being at 10 o'clock in the morning in Lab 111, almost alone. Uh, yeah, experiencing being in somebody else's shoes. I think that's a great exercise for empathic listening.
I haven't thought about that. I'm not that often in the cinema, but I do watch a lot of movies, but then on the TV. I like watching movies.
I'm sure you can experience this also watching a movie on a TV, but I would say that the immersive experience of
Yeah.
the cinema will help. Just like when you're meditating, the place you meditate in is mostly, empty of noise and people because you need to concentrate. So you can think about going to the cinema as a meditation practice as well.
Well, if you would ask my wife, I think that she already would say that I am meditating when I'm watching a movie because I'm completely focused. I don't hear anything anymore. So I'm already very focused when I'm watching a movie, which
Okay.
is not always good for people who are with me. But whenever a movie is on, I go in and I'm lost. I forget everything. I mentioned in the beginning, you call your company and the work that you do the communication ecologist. Which, when you just looking from the surface, it sounds like an odd combination, right? Communication and ecology. Why is it? What is it for you? What does that mean?
So the same way I've connected cinema and architecture, it's the same way I connect my ideas and I live my life by connecting concepts, by learning every day. And when I was reading about communication, I mean, I've read a lot of books, I've listened to lectures, I've researched. So on my research, let's say, on how I could be a better communicator and also share my love for communication, I came across ecology. I think it was by a lecture by Timothy Morton, philosopher, and he was talking about ecology in some way. And then I got interested in his point of view, and then I went to research because I actually didn't really know what an ecologist does. You know, what is the day-to-day work of an ecologist? And then by researching, I realized that, well, ecology is a study of an ecosystem. and an ecologist studies that ecosystem and learns about the organisms that are part of that ecosystem. And then if there's a lack of balance, if there's a struggle, if there's an issue in the ecosystem, the ecologist comes in and restores the balance, or at least helps restore the balance. And then I thought, wait a minute, this is actually exactly what I do when I go into a mediation between two people. There is an ecosystem, there is a context, right? That these two people are in a different context inside of one ecosystem, which is their relationship, their dynamic. And there's something that happened. There's some mistrust going on, there's some disconnection going on. So I come in, I translate this judgment, this story that they have about each other and about the situation, I translate it into needs, into actually what they really want. And then I can fall in love with both of them because I'm neutral, I'm in the middle. And then I help them to restore balance. I help them to restore this connection. And it's a beautiful thing to see how people can grow if we nourish the soil that is already there. So that's the connection that I do. I am a communication ecologist because I do bring balance to an ecosystem that is unbalanced, that is disconnected.
Mm-hmm. And you talk about the four foundational pillars of what you do is interdependence, sustainability, diversity, and regeneration. And I think because what you were just telling me about how the ecologist tries to help restore balance, there's also a lot of voices going on that we should let nature just do its thing because then it will restore automatically, right? If we just leave, if we just leave the nature, it will just restore. Do you feel you could do the same thing with relationships and communication? If you leave the communication, it will restore?
I believe that in terms of nature, or because we are nature, so I don't want to make the division between we. I think all living beings, we all belong to the same nature. I do believe that it works with interdependence. So a communication, as well as our communication, the human communication or a living, sentient being communication, is based on a feedback loop, right? So we are in constant communication, and that's how we can balance our dynamics, balance our ecosystem. So I believe that by sharing a toolkit, by sharing a communication model, sharing a different way of thinking, a different way of living, which is what I do, that is then scalable, because it's something that we already know, but we forget how to do. This connection, this respect, this communicating with respect for ourselves and for others. So I believe that my help is there, it's just a drop that I put in the soil, and then the soil can regenerate itself by that knowledge. The same way that every soil, every living being is always learning. Things change and they adapt because they absorb the knowledge. So I think it works the same way in all of us. Nature in itself, living beings, human beings, it's this constant feedback loop. And I'm just, putting a drop of help in the soil. So I don't know if I'm answering your question correctly, because you concretely asked me if we leave people alone communicating as they normally communicate, The thing is that there was a beginning, right? This type of communication, the everyday communication that we have, that is very based on this conditioning of our culture, our family, our roots, our race. So there's so many things that are in the context of each one of us when we are communicating. And the source, how we were born, we were not born knowing how to communicate. We are learning every day because we communicate emotions since we were born. But these ones start being unconsciously programmed. We are unconsciously being trained since we are born, right? But when we are born, we are, free of judgments. We are free of the moral institutions. We are free of, but then we assimilate. We assimilate, we assimilate, we assimilate. So what is the difference between that and the assimilation that the other living beings experience? So I think it's very relatable. How are you now? How is that all of this? I'm just curious how all of this that I've said makes sense to you, or what are you thinking about?
Well, I think what you can see today is, I was just reading this book about how the democracy is, we are losing democracy. That's what he's talking about. And having these opposite sides, left and right, far right, really left, and just making assumptions and doing statements instead of having conversations, right? Instead of having a real connection, makes us just, it drives us apart. That's what I feel, and what you just said is, um, all these things that you mentioned, that form us as a person, that we learn from culture or from upbringing, that pushes us towards a direction where we not lose, but forget, um, how you could communicate, how the source is really open, for no more, um, relationships and communication, right?
Yeah. And the positive thing about that is to focus on the learning part. It was learned, so it can be relearned.
Hmm.
And that's what I do. What I do is to share a communication toolkit, a model that brings you back to a language of connection, to a language of trust in yourself and then in others, because it always starts with oneself. So we first have to understand what is going on in us, what is important for us, to be aware of what we're feeling, of what are our needs, and only then we can ask for what we want in a way that is respectful for us and for the others. And that's why I use the model of nonviolent communication, which has transformed my life personally, and that I believe that it encompasses all in a very simple model that is not easy to implement because it needs practice, but it's a very simple model. Um, and now I'm thinking about the IDGs when I say simple model, because I know we were going to talk about that. And I would like to introduce just that. When I heard about the inner development goals and I researched about it, and then I attended the summit this year in Stockholm, I was very encouraged by the simplicity of it, because it's a very, very deep and complex, um, let's say, framework, but at the same time, they made it accessible They made it simple. They made it accessible to people that would probably reject it if they would hear it for the first time. That in a business, in a workplace environment, you will need to be aware, inner compass, integrity, authenticity,
Courage.
meditation, courage, vulnerability. These are words that are entering the workspace realm very recently. And people, a lot of people, even in the summit, I heard that people are still struggling with these words. But at the same time, they were there and they were so enjoying being together and connecting and making these wonderful exercises, somatic exercises and visualization and imagination. And I really felt that people were collectively enjoying being more aware of their bodies, aware of each other, aware of what they wanted. And I really truly believe that they're doing a great job in terms of communication, visual communication, for more companies to integrate this other side, this side that I think it's an ecological side. It's an ecological way of thinking about the workplace and how we relate in the workplace.
That's nicely put. I enjoy how you make the connection from the communication part, the nonviolent communication part, the simplicity of the tool, but still it's difficult to really do. You need to practice, and the same is true for the inner development goals. The framework looks very easy, but still, if you really want to become better at these skills, it's still a lot of work that you need to do.
But if you present something as a lot of work in the first place, then you will have much less people wanting to
yeah,
to go and go deep in it.
And at the same time, because the skills that are in the framework are just very well-known skills. We all know the skills. Well, let's say 80% of the skills that are in the framework, we all know. We understand, we have heard of it before, so we know what it is. We may not be practicing it, but we know what it is. And I think it's the same with what you say with your four parts of the non-violent communication. It's the same thing. It's very simple and basic. We know the steps if you take them apart, but it's not easy to do.
No, because that's not part of our everyday language.
So what kind of difficulties do you see in the workplace, in the communication between teams, internally in teams, and with teams and their leaders, for example?
Well, I see that there's a lot of disconnection. There's a lot of mistrust. Obviously, if you come from a domination system, a hierarchical system, where we are educated since we are born, first we have our parents as authority, then we have the teachers as authority, then we have our managers or bosses or leaders as so I see that the disconnection starts because there is power over instead of power with. So I think that's one of the issues I see. It's the letting go, the trusting the other. And because there's also a lot of self-disconnection. There's fears, there's sugarcoating, everything is fine, there's no conflicts, we don't want to enter there. People are afraid of conflicts. I mean, I love conflicts because loving conflicts means that you're curious. I'm always going to learn something if there's a conflict. I'm going to learn something about somebody else and I'm going to learn something about myself. But it's the way that this image, these stories that we have about a conflict, they're so negative. The stories about trusting others, about competition, about growth, right? So I also see a lot of disengagement with the companies and the leaders' mission and goals. Um, so that's something also that I work on. And I can tell you very straightforward that most of these issues that I encounter are issues of interpersonal communication. They start with interpersonal communication and then they go into more processes of internal communication as well that are very linear and they are not diverse and inclusive to everyone that works in the company. So it's again like what we have in our education system, one fits all. When you implement the internal communication process, you have to be aware and we have to know which kind of employees you have, what kind of communication methods do they enjoy the most. And I think that there's still a lot to do in terms of implementing not only interpersonal communication, but also the processes of communication within the company. So when I normally enter as a conflict mediator. And I love conflict, as I said already, but I wish I would enter sooner to avoid or to share and teach people how to enjoy that conflict and not make it something that is not useful, because it is always useful. But it's just a shift of mindset, a shift of thinking.
Two things. I'd like you to explain a bit more about what is interpersonal communication so we understand what you're thinking of.
Yeah.
And I really like how you put this. I wouldn't say, I wanted to say frame this, but it's not what I wanted to do. How you put this was I would love to come sooner so that people would start to love the conflict. And I recognize this, how difficult I find it to be in a conflict. And at the same time, I know it is good for the relationship. It is good to learn from the other parties what they want, or the other person what they want. So I know it's good, but I still feel uncomfortable when there's a conflict in like a meeting or in a conversation. But first, do the interpersonal relationship communication.
Well, interpersonal communication is just communication between two people, between a team. So that's basically what interpersonal communication is. Is that enough for you?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
How to enjoy conflict? That's the second question.
I didn't ask it, but yes, you are right.
So how do we enjoy conflict? Well, first, again, we have to start with ourselves. We have to understand that if a conflict arises, is because needs are not being met by both sides. Okay. So for me, the best way to explain is with an example. So I can give an example of one of my clients, not disclosing, of course, the names. But for example, there were two teams that were very disconnected. So there was a conflict between these two teams. And one team was very angry. On the other side, they were also very disappointed, so these were the feelings, So disappointment, anger, frustration, hopelessness. And that's one of the things that we have to do, not have to do, but it's useful to do in when we talk about communication, interpersonal communication, is to start with the literacy of feelings and needs. Normally, we always use the same words. I'm depressed, I'm tired, I'm angry. But there's so many words that we can use that really um, portray the experience that we're having at that moment. So that's one part of the training, is this literacy of needs and feelings. Okay, so the two, on one side they're angry, frustrated, hopeless. On the other side, they want to, they don't feel heard. They want more connection. And these are two teams that never seen each other in person. They work only in an online setting since the beginning. Okay, so this one of the teams were really eager for connection, for this in-person connection. So something happens, just like in a movie, you know, something happens to the hero, and then what what are we going to do? What are the needs? So we identify the feelings, and now we have to identify the needs. So what I do with them is I bring them one at a time. I listen to them. I identify the needs. I help them translate these judgments, these stories for the other as their needs. So, for example, yeah, you're really angry with the other side because you so wish to be understood. Yeah, I really want to be understood. Yeah, it would be so great to be understood. Yes. So if you start identifying, guessing, you're not saying what they're feeling, but you're guessing. Yeah, you really want to be understood. They say yes. So then you begin, this empathic listening begins to bring softness in the body, because a lot of the conflict is in the body. We feel stressed, we feel contracted. So this guessing of feelings and needs in this empathic listening, it's just to soften the body. And you can see it, you can see the body softening, you see that the words are not coming as strong. Then you go into the other side and you do the same. Okay, you really, you feel frustrated because you really want to be connected. Is that it? You really want to connect with these people that you work every day. Yes, I really want to connect with them, and I've never seen them, I've never touched them. I only see them online. So then you connect. So then you see it's beautiful. In one side, there's somebody wishing for connection, and on the other side, somebody wishing to be understood.
Yeah.
So now I see them all. I fall in love with both of them. And then I bring them together in a room where they are already softer, because I listened. And then they come and then they start talking. And then I guide, let's say I'm a guide. I translate again. Sometimes some judgments pop up again. And I help them translate those judgments. You didn't listen to me. I really want to be listened to. I wish so much to be listened to. So it's this soft translation of from the from the judgment, the story, to the wish, to the dream. And when there's a connection, when they really truly hear each other, which is often the case, sometimes it takes a bit longer than others, but there's often a point where they see each other again as human beings. And when they see each other through needs instead of stories, then magic happens. Transformation happens by itself, and I can just sit down and see it happen. I don't have to do anything. Because they will start collaborating, they will start co-creating, they will start innovating in strategies that fulfill both parts' needs. So that's the beauty of the conflict. And that's how you can enjoy conflict, is by understanding, coming from a place of understanding yourself and the other.
I like what you say, and I also when you said, so it happens in the body, and I feel it in my stomach most of the time. So yes, I do sense like these kind of emotions in my body, and find it also difficult to mention them, to address them, I should say, to address them in public at that moment. So I can understand what you're saying. If
Yeah, so there is a practice there,
yeah,
a practice of vulnerability, of openness, of trust, that in any case, if you show your humanness to another human being, that most of the time, rarely the case that this doesn't happen, that the other human being doesn't connect with your humanity.
and I also think that starting to work with the inner development goals and looking a lot more at the self, I've started to practice this, what you're telling me. I've started to open up in a meeting when something doesn't feel good for me, or I have feelings that something is happening. Normally I would have not talked about it, but I've recently noticed, looking back at some recent conversation, that I try to bring in what I sense, what I really feel at that moment. Even though I don't need a resolution, I don't need somebody to solve something for me. I just need to share how I feel. I know also, I think it's very common that people will start to look for solutions, how they can help you to solve that, right?
Yes, it is common in our society to not be relaxed with unpleasant feelings from the other, So how to enjoy somebody else's pain, we say in NVC, in nonviolent communication. And, enjoying the pain is meaning that you are there, you are present with the person, and you're listening, but you don't have to do anything about it. And in our conditioning, depending in our cultures, that they're stronger than in others, but I think in a Western culture mainly, there is this surge, this urge to fix, this urge to preach, to teach, to and to let go of that. It's also a practice. But in a lot of my training, sometimes in the end, people say, Sophia, this is amazing. I want to do this, but it's so difficult. How am I going to think about all of these things before I speak? My observation, feelings, needs, and then ask for what I want. And then I always make a bit the comparison with when we go on our first driver's license practical class. I remember the first time I did it, I had to look at all the mirrors, and then I had the gears, and then my feet, and then I have to think about the civilians on the road, and and I thought to myself, I will never be able to remember all of this and to be aware of all of this. But after a couple of years of practice, it's autopilot. We go on the road and we don't even remember how we got home. So it's the same thing with communication. It's the same thing with learning something new. Our brain is plastic. The plasticity of our brain is amazing. And with repetition, we can learn anything. So we can learn also a way of communicating that is more connecting, that is more helpful, that brings more well-being to the workplace and beyond. Of course, my work focus on the workplace because that's where we spend most of our lives. And I thought to myself, if I want to share this practice and this wisdom with others, what is the best place to do? And after a while, I thought, coming back to the beginning of our conversation, I've done many jobs in my life, even jobs that I didn't enjoy, but the ones that I remember, even that I didn't enjoy doing, was the ones that I had the best relationships. That I knew that I was going to work, I was going to laugh, I was going to be supported, I would have a community, I would go for partying with my colleagues. It's about belonging. It's about community. So if we are able to foster this in any work environment and don't bring the leftovers home, then the scope of my impact will go beyond the workplace. But I prefer to start in the workplace because that's where we find friendship, that's where we find love, that's where we find meaning, community. That's where we meet so many of our core needs as human beings that I thought this is where I want to start.
I think I want to wrap this up now. I want to for sure do one thing, is to show this so people can scan the QR code and go directly to your LinkedIn profile and look up and see also your website is at the top of your profile on LinkedIn, so they can go directly to your website too. And they see also on your website the NVC, so the nonviolent communication explanation. They see also the link that you make with the ecology side. I really enjoyed learning from you today, because to me, enjoying difficult conversations, enjoying maybe a fight even, right, sometimes, is something I learned today is a very interesting thing to do. Instead of trying to avoid it, trying to enjoy it. I think that's a good takeaway for me for today. And I think if you're listening as a leader today, that's the same thing for you, how you could do this with your team and how you can learn the people in your team to use these steps, way of working.
Cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah.
So thank you for listening today. Thank you, Sofia, for helping us with enjoying these painful conversations, these uncomfortable situations, to make them enjoyable, to enjoy them and see how you can learn from the other person. So thank you, Sofia, for that.
You're welcome. And thank you everyone that was listening and that will listen after. And I hope that in some way this resonated and clicked something in you, and that, yes, I'm very expecting people to give me feedback, to bring me some conflicts for me to enjoy, and working with teams and helping leaders to become better communicators, better humans. It's part of my mission. So thank you very much, Erno, and everyone out there. And have a great weekend.
And on Monday, we always publish the post that goes with this episode, and the video and audio version of this episode. So there's always time to do that. And as always, we will be back next Friday at 4 p.m. Central European Time, or 9 a.m. at Central US Time. And if you want to, stay in conversation with us, join our LinkedIn group of Better Leaders. And the link is directly below this episode or below in the post what you're watching. So I'll see you there.